Good morning. My name is John Jackson. I'm lucky because I get to do oral histories with very distinguished people in the citrus business. And today we're in Oviedo with Rex Clonts and David Evans. And we're going to talk history in citrus. I've known these two gentlemen for a long time, and we're going to have a lot of fun. They're related, so let me start off, and I'm going to ask David to give a brief family history and how they got into Oviedo and established in this community. So without spending more than 30 minutes, David, would you? Because it's a fantastic story.
So Rex and I have the same great-grandfather and grandmother, James Hiram Lee and Laura Barnett. She's actually a Barnett. Her uncle was an early Methodist circuit rider for the Methodist Church. And so they came to Oviedo in about 1870, 1869, 1871, 72, something like that. And they had 13 children?
Yeah.
They had 13 children, of which Rex's grandfather, Charles Simeon Lee, and my grandmother, George Lee Wheeler, were brother and sisters. And so out of that, my grandfather, Frank Wheeler Sr., his family came down from southwest Georgia, and he wound up in Plant City in the timber business, and my great-grandfather Wheeler died down there, and so my grandfather, Frank Wheeler Sr., had an uncle here in Oviedo, John Lawton, who went down and brought he and his younger brother and my grandmother back, great-grandmother, back to Oviedo. And so as James Hiram Lee, at the time, was caretaking a lot of citrus for northern growers who had come down by way of the St. Johns River to Lake Jessup and Celery's Wharf, and had jumped off as one of the last navigable parts of the St. Johns River, and had started a community called the Lake Jessup Community. Rex can correct me if I get some of this wrong on the second take. But so a lot of those northern growers started growing citrus, and we actually have documentation where 50,000 boxes of oranges were grown in the Geneva, Oviedo, Chuliota area and shipped to the northern markets before the 1895 freeze. We have that documented with some out of the archives at the Florida Times-Union in Jacksonville. So anyway, when my great-grandfather, James Hiram, was the caretaker for a lot of these northern growers, and then my grandfather, Frank Wheeler, came back to Oviedo prior to the 1895 freeze, and his uncle, John Lawton, taught him to be a telegrapher. Well, the railroads came into Central Florida in the 1880s, and so he wound up being a telegrapher here in Oviedo and was a telegrapher in the 1895 freeze. And he saw all the damage because he was 17 years old, and he was sending these messages to the northern markets on this 50,000 boxes of oranges. And he saw the devastation, and there was one grove in East Orange County that didn't freeze, and it's that grove right there, the Lake Pickett Grove. And so his personal goal in life was to acquire that grove, and he eventually did. But he also became a junior partner in the firm Nelson Company by the two Steen Nelson and his brother, who had a packing house here in Oviedo in the 1880s. And so eventually he bought them out, and as a junior partner, he bought out the senior partners and acquired Nelson Company in the early 1900s, and then went on to run that company until his death in 1954. So his son was Frank Wheeler Jr. His oldest daughter was my mother, Claire Lee Wheeler Evans, and his youngest daughter was Louise Marie Wheeler Martin. And so that's kind of the thumbnail sketch.
I think it'd be good to say that coming from my stories of my mother mainly, but also from my grandfather, who was the youngest of those 13 children. He was only 4 years old when the Great Freeze happened. But that is his earliest memory. The rifle shot cracks in the night as the bark split on trees, and all the turmoil of the men rushing in and out of the house trying to burn, keep the fires going in the groves, and the women up all night cooking to have something hot for them to get out of the cold in. Mm-hmm. And he described to me that after that second freeze, almost all of these northern families who had come down here to build summer homes and make a little money, it was a great deal for them on citrus. They hurriedly packed, got on the trains, and they left an apocalyptic landscape that had frozen everything. Even palmettos. It froze. Literally, the landscape was drastically changed, and their dreams of tropical paradise were shattered in those two freezes. Mm-hmm. But that disaster opened up our great-grandfather's chance to buy groves that would have been worth a lot of money but right before the freeze for pennies. And he only had pennies. They were really working hard to get by, especially with 13 children. But they recognized the opportunity, and they invested everything they could, bought all the groves, and most of them dead, but they managed to find seedlings, replant those, and that was really the start of David and I's history in the citrus business.
Yeah, well, you can go back, Rex, and there's stories like that. In the 1870s, it was kind of the boom, or an early boom, and people were starting to plant groves and make some money, and so folks in the north moved down with visions of paradise and beautiful groves, not realizing that you had to wait 3 or 4 years before you got into production. You had to hand remove palmettos and pines from the scrubland. But the story of your grandparents is it resonates as I do some of this work. Jimmy Simpson's dad, Uncle Jimmy there in Mount Dora, he was 14 when the freeze came. And his dad quit citrus and went into turpentine, but he decided to stay in citrus. And so there were people like that revived this industry, because the 1894-95 freeze did kill probably 99% of all the citrus trees. There might have been a Lake Pickett or some others that were there, and then it took off, and so it was fascinating. But how you ended up in the vegetable business as well as citrus too?
My dad's father moved down here. In fact, my dad was 1 year old riding on his mother's knee in the Model A coming from North Georgia, where he had grown up on a hardscrabble farm up there, but had gotten an education, a college education, which was pretty rare back then. So he took a job banking as a banker here in Oviedo in 1926. And it didn't take long being in the bank to tell where the money was being made. It was being made in the new celery industry. And so within about 4 years, he decided he'd rent some land and grow celery. And he said, I made so much money that the next year I bought 6 acres. So, and then grew from there. Right. And formed a company. And he was a businessman, so he understood the value of forming a company and growing. And at one time, CR Clonts and Associated Growers had 8 members, and who all had their own patch. But my grandfather, we call him Big Daddy, had set up all of them with buying the right type of land and showing them how to irrigate it and the finer points of growing celery, which is a difficult crop to grow. Yeah. And so I grew up in the vegetable business, principally the celery business. And
Big Daddy, was he the marketer, and did he have a packing facility? Or?
no, he didn't. He went with Chase and Company. Sanford got in the celery business a little bit before Oviedo, and the rail came to Sanford first. So Chase and Company had a large packing house and cooling and shipping facilities there. And you know, it's at that time no stoplights but terrible roads. But one of my dad's first jobs on the farm was at about 11 or 12 years old, was driving loads of celery to Sanford and backing them up to the dock to be unloaded in Sanford.
I assume that the label was like we did in citrus. You could have your label that would put on your boxes. It was packed by somebody else, and so it went to the market that way.
Yes, that's right. It was, and then originally it was done through Chase and Company, but very soon after that he got his own salesman, and when my dad got back from the war, they took over the selling part of it, even though they were still using Chase and Company, and sometimes using Wheeler Martin Evans pre-cooler here in Oviedo to do that. About the time I was born, they opened up, my dad and my grandfather opened up a new large farm. Wasn't cleared, but they started clearing in Apopka and on the shores of Lake Apopka. And over the next 20 years, our operation transitioned from these small farms in Oviedo, which were great when you were, growing with mules and small tractors, but didn't meet modern agricultural scale. So the year I was born, they began farming in Zellwood, and when I got out of college, that's where I went to work. I didn't plan to stay there, but I got hooked on it once I had a little skin in the game. Yeah. And so my life was vegetables. At one time we were growing 1,700 acres of vegetables a year over there, and had diversified to about 6 crops. And but we had some environmental problems, and the state bought us out. And I turned my attention then to citrus, which I had really wanted to do. From the time I was 30 years old, I realized that my retirement plan was to buy into the citrus industry in a bigger way. It didn't mean we weren't already in citrus. We had about 200 acres of grove that my dad had planted here in Oviedo. Basically, every time he made money in the vegetable business, he spent it to plant some more citrus grove. Yeah. Interesting thing, though, in Oviedo, and especially where David's family had grove at Lake Pickett, and we had grove in Black Hammock on the south shore of Lake Jessup, was that during the freezes of the 80s, we didn't lose much production. Our company actually increased production during the 80s because we were in that planting phase, and we used to put the dirt up around bank the trees, the young trees, so they took the brunt of the cold, but they were able to come back in the spring. And we had as warm a place, it wasn't warm enough, but it was warm enough to give us the ability to have production very quickly in 1990 and 1991, when the majority of Central Florida citrus was just out of business. Right. And those prices were high, and so that was a very beneficial time for us.
Yeah. Yeah, so freezers were great marketing tools, yeah, if you were fortunate enough to be somebody that had fruit. Mm-hmm. And
so it's interesting because it's all about timing. So Nelson Company's groves, which was about 2,700 acres, and we were doing about 1.2 million boxes of fruit through our packing house. Our groves were mature, And so we suffered more than the younger groves because the mature groves, we survived 82, 83, we survived 85, but 89 is the one that really took it away. And so it was another probably 15 years before we were able to replant and recover and get back to a profitable, which I think is probably the story of most people and anywhere north of Highway 60, specifically north of Highway 50, and definitely north of Highway 40 in Marion, Lake, North Orange County. So a lot of Rex's story is parallel to ours. I got out of the service in '74 and came back. I had a finance and a agricultural, horticultural minor, and came back and started off. Nelson Company also had a fertilizer company which did blended fertilizers for ag, but Rex's family's experiences with the freezes are a little different than ours in that we took more of a hit than they did, because with a row crop you can recover and plant another crop. With a tree crop, once you lose your trees, then it's 7 or 8 years to get back into production if you can get the resets. So it's a study in timing, and it's interesting too because my Uncle Frank and Rex's father grew up together, even though there was a little bit of age difference. And my dad was from Chicago as an accountant, so I asked him. He came to Oviedo after the war because Grandfather Wheeler had become a telegrapher. He was with the railroad, and so he and his family, they could travel. So my mother and brothers and sister traveled because their father was associated with the railroad. So she was able to go to Chicago in the mid-30s to get her master's degree at Northwestern University, and that's where she met my dad in a Methodist Sunday school class in Evanston. And he was with an accounting firm. He'd grown up in a children's home in Illinois because, interestingly enough, his father and his uncle both died within 5 days of each other in 1918 from the Spanish flu. And so my father's family drew the short straw because they were in Sharon, Pennsylvania at the time, and the grandparents could only support one family, and so the other family got shipped off. And so my dad wanted to be a doctor and went to Ohio State, but his bank closed in the Depression, so he finally wound up being a tool and die apprentice, but he met a friend who'd gotten through school and got his accounting degree in Chicago and started my dad in the mailroom at a national accounting firm, and Dad went back to night school at Northwestern, got his accounting degree, and so, but he was then shipped off like Rex's dad and my Uncle Frank. They were shipped off. He went to Europe and didn't get back until 1945. But so I asked him when I got out of the service in '74, why is he Yankee with an accounting degree working for a national accounting firm in Chicago? And he said he saw more opportunity in Florida. And I said, well, why? What do you say? He said, well, David, he said, in 1947, he said, there was a very large ranch in East Orange County selling for $5 an acre. And so if you follow the real estate values from that $5 an acre in 1947 forward, that was the opportunity my father saw. And so also, as Rex talked about, in the 1800s, they were getting $5 a box for oranges in the northern markets. Well, they were still getting $5 a box in the 1980s, 1990s. It was back to $5 a box, and so it's you present value $5 in the 1880s versus $5 today. Big difference, and that's the profitability that Big Daddy Clonts saw as a banker. And where were people making money? Well, it was celery and citrus early on. But the development of the citrus industry in Florida has been really, there always has seemed to be a saving discovery or a saving grace when we needed it economically, whether it was from fresh fruit to canned
FCOJ came along. And
FCOJ and concentrate. And you had mentioned Mr. Simpson. We were members of B&W Concentrate in Groveland, and Mr. Simpson was also a member. And so it's an interesting, the parallels and the weaving of paths. And my grandfather Wheeler was, Rex's grandfather was president of the bank, and my grandfather Wheeler was chairman of the board of the bank. And then Rex's other grandfather, C.S. Lee, was a board member of the bank. So I mean, it's been a very tight, a very rewarding, synergistic relationship over the years between the families, and it's.
Well, there, you know, finances to me, both your families were good businessmen, and in my observation, the folks who really suffered terribly in the freezes were some of these growers that were highly leveraged, and so they had a debt that they were having to deal with. And so when you have a great spreadsheet that somebody prepares, and all of a sudden that top line that says income, when it goes to zero, the whole rest of the spreadsheet just collapses. Yep. And so if you had a big debt, obviously your family didn't have to sell grows to survive.
So John, when I came back in '74, I couldn't get a Jeep Wagoneer. I had to drive a Ford Torino with no air conditioning. And so I was in the groves in Lake County, those sand groves in Lake County, with a two-wheel drive car and not a four-wheel drive Jeep. And so it was always, you lived below your means and you always banked your profits. And so Rex's family was the same way. I won't say we were cheap, but we were very frugal. It was frugal. And so that's one of the reasons that we feel like we were able, that and developing deep banking relationships with SunTrust or the other banks, independent at that time, independent banks, that they knew the character of the borrower. And Rex hadn't said anything, but when his father and grandfather and he launched off into some of their, I won't say new ventures, like with carrots and with spinach, they were big borrowers. Growers in agriculture have always been big borrowers, and it was always that came back to the character of the borrower, not necessarily the underlying assets.
A lot of those deals were made with a handshake.
They were.
No legal contracts or anything else. I can remember talking to Gilbert Bowen in our interview, and he said, I could call Lex Pasco and tell them I needed $1 million, and they said, well, do you want to come pick up the check or have you deliver it? You know, no questions about it. But it was the quality and the character of the farmers that made a big difference in it. So
you bought the piece there around the cell tower on the northwest corner. They've got that, and that'll be a long play there too. But anyway, there isn't, suffice it to say, there's not a live citrus tree on that beautiful grove. And I try to avoid it at all costs. It just breaks my heart to go.
It is. It's terrible to drive 27. It's even worse to drive 429.
Yeah.
I got lost trying to take my grandkids to the golf tournament down there.
Yeah.
You go, huh? So, I got one quick question. Benjamin Franklin Wheeler is in the Citrus Hall of Fame. Is that
That's my grandfather.
Your grandfather?
That's my mother's father. And so it's an interesting guy, just like Rex's C.S. Lee, his grandfather. Had no father, but he was very ambitious and very entrepreneurial and a very good businessman. And so it's interesting that we've got a chair out in the lobby that the Florida Chamber of Commerce called us and said, we've got a chair up here with your grandfather's name on it. And would you like it? And we said, absolutely, we'll like it. So when we went up and got it, and I looked in there are people like C.C., Ben Hill Griffin, J.J. Parrish, C.C. Commander was the one I was trying to, and a lot of other people, and we really don't know why or what was the purpose of this, other than they were recognizing business people. Bostic is in there. Some of the early Florida business people. So, but he was just a very good businessman, and again, conservative, frugal, made some good decisions, and as Rex's family and our family knows, land has been very good to us. There was a period in time when land could have become a liability, but if you had staying power, it turned around and became an asset. But you had to have staying power.
And people think it was made overnight, but it wasn't.
No.
You had to hang around a couple of generations to be able to.
My dad always said that he wanted to buy every piece of land he ever saw,
Right.
but he restricted that to parcels that he could buy that would pay their own way
Right.
in agriculture. And if they would pay their own way in agriculture, then he had the staying power.
Right.
And that's what both our families have been able to do.
Yeah,
So-
you look at some of these operations. Catherine was grew up in the dairy business, and the mistake her family made was her dad decided to get way out of town. He should have been like T.G. Lee, who didn't get too far out of town and could sell the dairy for Colonial Plaza, and then go. Then he buys land out there by the airport. So location.
Well, John, I've got a follow-up point to what Rex said. My father said, you want to own the underlying asset. In his generation, that was probably correct. As long as the underground asset was income producing, you could carry it. In my generation, I've seen a change that the people who own the cash flow, in other words, the professionals, the lawyers, the doctors, the surgeons, have wound up buying a lot of ag properties when the cycle, one of those cycles that we see in ag where you have a profitable year, but you have several unprofitable years, and you're too tight on your finances, and that's when the people who have the cash flow step in and acquire your assets. And so I've seen that in my generation. Now we're back to, if you have the cash flow, then you can buy the underlying asset. If you don't have the underlying asset that produces a problem, then you can't hold it. And these become some of the changes of economics that I've experienced.
I want to go back quickly. Your family became diversified, I say, in agriculture. Clarify for me, you had a fertilizer, you had a packing house,
Right.
and you
Okay.
all managed groves. You had a grove care business.
That's correct. Nelson Company was a family holding company. And under Nelson Company, you had Wheeler Fertilizer, which had a mixed blending plant in Oviedo. We sold agricultural fertilizers throughout Central Florida. In fact, early on, we were actually shipping fertilizers to the Everglades, to the Glades. And that's when fertilizer was in bags, 100-pound bags.
Were you ever a fertilizer salesman?
I was a fertilizer salesman straight out of the service.
That's a great learning experience, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a humbling experience. If you can't handle somebody saying no, I'm buying from your competitor.
Oh, don't tell anything except what's the price per ton. That's all I'm interested
That's right.
in. You know?
Well, there's another thing too. And Nelson Company also had a packing house, which my grandfather had bought, which was built in the 1880s by the Nelson brothers. And then we were members of B&W Concentrate, and we also had bought a celery pre-cooler here in Oviedo in the 50s, trying to, as Rex said earlier, trying to service the needs rather than having the inefficiency of having to harvest it, put it on a truck, and take it to Sanford. And one of the more successful growers here had put up a pre-cooler, celery pre-cooler, but then he unfortunately passed away early on, and we were able to pick it up. And so it's multi-dimensional, laterally diversified, maybe even a little horizontally diversified, because we had three families with, I had my three brothers, and then I had four cousins. All of us were in the business together, and eventually you kind of work your way through those numbers down to where it's now my brother, myself, and another brother who own Nelson Company and the related entities. So, but a lot of that consolidation took place because of the impact of the freezes and the loss of income. And we've also become developers. We've done several fairly significant 400 and 500 acre developments, housing developments. So it's, you, as my father said and Rex said earlier, you go where the money's being made, and you figure it out, and you just don't want to make too many bad mistakes.
Yeah, well, the problem with you guys, you have this genetic flaw that says never quit. I'm in the farming business. so Clonts, here's what I understand you did. You got in the organic soil vegetable deal in Zellwood, and then Water Management District came along and said, we really would like to buy that land and convert it back to its native state. Gave you the opportunity to jump into citrus. And so you went, where'd you go out? Where'd you buy citrus?
First of all, to get paid for that operation over there, the Water Management District was offering us pennies. But a group of us got together, went to the legislature and lobbied and got the state legislature to proclaim that they were buying us as going businesses. And that made all the difference. It increased the value of what we had to give up, and made it. And for me, I was exactly 50 years old. I had already decided that I was going to retire into the citrus business. We had just purchased a considerable amount of frozen out grove in South Lake County, frozen out from the 1989 freeze, and so price was low. We felt like we knew historically it had been real warm, good producing land, and so I had that to go to, and that's exactly what I did. When I sold the farm, I didn't miss a beat, just sort of shifted everything to finishing out developing that and getting production up. And right during those years, just after we sold the farm, we were almost at 1,000 acres of citrus, coming from just 10 years before being less than 200, or around 250 acres. So we used some of that money from that farm sale to do that, and then diversify into other.
Now the groves you bought was in water conserve too, right?
Yeah, and that was a great deal. In fact, I ran into Phil Cross yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he and I were at a Christmas party together, a Christmas event, and of 2,000 people in downtown Orlando. We just happened to run into each other. But the conserve concept that I wasn't responsible for, but I bought into it because I could see the value, was free water that was good quality, not great quality, not perfect, but it was good quality water, delivered under pressure, and
available on a cold night.
And when it was put in, most growers were still watering with overhead volume guns. In some cases, there were overhead irrigation in groves, but John, as you were part of, the freezes of the 80s taught us how to freeze protect economically. And so I looked at that and said, yes, these groves are frozen out, but it's really only the first time since the 1890s that they were frozen out. And they were planted at 110 trees to the acre, and not able to irrigate on a cold night. if I plant 150 trees to the acre, and so that I've got tighter rows and tighter spaces, and put in constant irrigation, I could have survived that grove. I shouldn't say I, but anybody who did that on that land could have survived at least the 80s freezes. I wasn't here in the 1890s to know about that one, but.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting to almost speculate what it would still be like there had we not suffered this tremendous 800-pound gorilla that walked in called greening, or HLB, because when Disney announced that they were coming to Florida, everybody in East Orange County, West Orange County, and South Lake County figured that, hell, there goes the citrus business. They're going to come in and all the labor's going to go to them and they're going to buy up all this land. But Disney came in, and do you think that those East County and West County and South Lake growers sold out? They were making money. And developer came on and said, hey, I'll give you $5,000 an acre and you're making $1,500 an acre and the land's paid for. So that's why Orlando moved north and south and never moved west. And anyway, it was just, if we hadn't had greening, couldn't grow any better citrus than you could grow there any more economically. It would have been great. Although you'd have ended up doing battle with Orange County commissioners over whether that you could have that water for free.
I would love that battle as opposed to greening.
Yes.
Because I would still be there, and that would be my retirement plan. That was that grove that we planted was great producing, had a good mix of varieties from fresh fruit to a lot of juice fruit, and very uniform producing year after year. And I just I loved the pace of it, and I loved trying to tweak things to get a little bit more production all the time.
Right.
And we could run that. We had 550 row acres there, and we could operate that with one person and 4 contractors, and me and a telephone, and a bookkeeper to make sure I didn't overspend. But seriously, it was a very economical operation, and so without greening, prior to greening, we were going to keep that grove forever. Was my plan for my lifetime.
Citrus was a fabulous asset. You know, Kathleen was a county commissioner, and we would solve most of our problems with government if we were all in agriculture, because you guys in agriculture paid ad valorem taxes, provided jobs,
Right.
and got very little services actually for what you were doing. And so if we could go back to the good old days, we wouldn't have to worry about a lot of those problems. In Lake County, for example, it was citrus, and then it was Social Security because everybody,
Right.
older folks retired there. But the dynamic certainly changed. And how did greening impact you? Were you already down the road and seeing that you were going to have to, that
Right.
you were in a different environment? Rex was in a sound agricultural area.
Right.
Encroachment was already working on you pretty
So it's really interesting. We had a fairly large grove down in Immokalee. It fell at the Felda Mall, just east of the Felda Mall, and we were managing that grove. And I saw greening company, and I looked at my brothers and I said, "Why do we have this grove down here? There's no alternative use for this land." And so we 1031 back up to Orlando for an office building. And so another thing that happens is in Oviedo, you're on flatwoods type of soils, high pound solids. High pound solids is not unusual for us to be 8 pounds of solids. Whereas if you're on the sand ridge, it's a little less than that, different root stocks. We were on sour and they were on more lemon and some of the others. And so Rex could get the yield in the boxes and make up for the pound solids by the boxes and the lower bricks. But we had less boxes, but higher bricks. So that's the trade-off of being on the ridge versus being in the flatwoods. And the other thing is that at one point prior to the freezes, Nelson Company was the second largest shipper of Orlando Tangelos in the state behind Lake Region. And I loved an Orlando Tangelo. A beautiful piece of fruit, but if you couldn't ship it fresh, then Minute Maid didn't want it in their juice because it wasn't an orange. And so you had to find, and that's one of the reasons that we were successful with B&W. B&W would take an Orlando Tangelo because of the color score and enhance their color and their concentrate. Or B&W did not get into the single strength, but they were strictly a concentrate. But you have to play the game bought to town. So wherever you are, whether you're in South Lake County or East Orange County, you've got to be horticulturally focused on the specifics that work in that location. And Rex is, we talked about not being cheap, but being frugal. Rex is a very efficient grower. And that is, his dad once told me, his dad and I were on a bank board together, and I would drive and I'd say to him, because I was always picking his dad's brain, he said, David, the low-cost producer survives. You may not make any money, but you survive. And so this is the efficiency that was drilled into Rex's head. And so I took it to heart. I don't like to be cheap, but I do like to be frugal. But on the other hand, there are things we all will go overboard in. So
Kids.
Well, kids, a little hunting, a little fishing, a little something like that. But did I answer your question?
No, you didn't. So the question is, when did you realize or feel very strongly that you were not going to stop urbanization and development, and that you either needed to sell out or be part of it?
So as Orlando expanded, and it's interesting, my dad wanted to go down to Vero and Fort Pierce and buy groves down there, and for one reason or other, we didn't do it. And he passed away early in his career when my brothers and I were just getting started into the business. And so he was the secretary treasurer of Nelson Company, but we didn't expand. And so we stayed with groves in Lake, Seminole, Volusia, Brevard, and Orange counties. And so as I saw the consolidation taking place and the urbanization happening in Lake, Orange, Seminole counties, I realized that decision that we should have made years before that we didn't make it wasn't going to play out well, that we were going to be urbanized. And so when I would get calls at night about our sprayers running from 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock,
And the neighbors complain.
and the neighbors were complaining, or we got a little spray drift, and I could say, management of these assets is going to get more and more taxing, and I don't know that I have the patience for all of this. But anyway, when greening finally hit us in the Lake Pickett groves, it became obvious to us. But the other thing that happened is Orange County back in the 80s started taking away the zoning of urban rural lands, and we are in the Christmas settlement, the Bithlo settlement at Lake Pickett, and so we were 1-to-1 zoning. Well, Orange County came in and rezoned everything 1-to-5 and 1-to-10. So when that happened, we went to Orlando, got our planners, got our environmentalists, and we went ahead and did a master plan, a PD for all of Lake Pickett and all of that area back in the 80s. And we just held on to it. And then at 10 years, we renewed it. Very expensive process. But we felt we had to protect our our 1 unit to acre zoning, which we were able to do. In fact, when we finally got around to doing some development, we were able to get at 0.8 units to the acre, or 1 unit to 0.8 acres. And so we were able to actually increase our density because we had already done our PDs some 20 years earlier. And so when we saw the two lines go opposite directions, profitability and expenses, then it became obvious what we had to do. And you know, there's, as my dad said, he said, we have a love for the citrus business and the citrus industry, but at the end of the day, you're a businessman. You have to make the decisions based upon the economics. And so those are part of the decisions we make and we think about as business people.
Yeah, now, so HLB impacted you, but HLB changed your entire master plan, right? Tell me a little bit how you remember the greening deal in your mindset. Were you?
Well, somebody came along and told me I had an insect called a psyllid. One of the, I'm sure it was one of the chemical reps, or maybe my county agent.
You might have. No, he had gone by then. He had retired.
The bearer of bad news.
But and I had been reading about it, but it was in, Dade County, so it was a long way off, and surely the citrus industry had faced all kinds of insects before and diseases, and we'd faced this one.
We'd gone through canker, we'd gone through burrowing nematode, you'd live with diprepes.
The weevils, diprepes and so on, much harder to control. I mean, you could spend a lot of money trying to control them and maybe decrease the population by 50%. With psyllid, you could go out and spray with a handful of different products that we had and kill 99% of them. And I thought, well, we'll just increase spraying. I'm a vegetable guy. I'm used to spraying every week. I don't mind doing that. I'll be just fine. Well, that 1% out of 100 that survives over time gets your whole grove. And so that's what I did. I mean, when we started having psyllids, we increased our spraying. We changed our watering frequencies because realized that pretty early on that roots were dying too. One lesson from my father, he said, you're looking at the top. Don't forget about the bottom. Just as important down there. And a vegetable, same as a citrus tree. So my philosophy of fighting greening was to outspend it. And that worked until about, we first found greening in 2007 in our grove. In 2011, the outspending did not work.
And it was way past the old seek and destroy plan that we went it with canker. The pathologist would tell you find an infected tree, but it ain't going to work when you have a vector like psyllids that are there.
Yeah, too many trees outside your control. I took 3 years there and organized all the growers in that conserve area, and we did aerial sprayings 4 times a year, and just to try to control our environment enough and control that psyllid, and ultimately we failed. Greening, to be such a weak bacteria, transmitted by a very selective insect, has turned out to be an incredibly steep hill to conquer. And I have no doubt that we will conquer it. However, the face of the industry has changed forever. If the freezes used to be the big change, greening, and tristasia changed grows. We've seen other diseases come and go that changed the industry significantly, but nothing like this.
Well, if you look at the production from the 1894-95 freeze, it had a couple of blips.
Yeah.
And everything, we survived like you did everything else. But when we hit 2005, 2006, when greening came, it has dropped
Right.
Precipitously.
It's now, we're almost back to what it was in 1894 and 95. So the question now then, as you look in the crystal ball, where's the citrus industry going to go? I mean, we have cups, we're growing them in greenhouses. Some people are injecting with antibiotics into the trees, and others are following, if you believe some of the advertisements in the magazines, that there's some chemical companies that can control greening. And
Boy, we've heard that a lot of times.
Yeah,
that's a broken record.
so it's
I mean, someday somebody will have something that does significant value there, but we've heard those promises before. When we were growing vegetables, I was really getting into the chemistry of controlling fungus and diseases and insects, and talking to my dad every day about new possibilities to try to new combinations or whatever. And he said at one point, he said, I'm glad you're doing all this, but he said there's the big issues in my lifetime in vegetable growing have been band-aided by application of crop protection products, but they've only been really advanced by breeding. And I think that's the key in citrus. It's got to be breeding. And you know, when we're talking about, you know, growing sweet corn, you could come up with a new sweet corn in 3 years. When you're talking about citrus, you're talking about 15 years. I mean, to really get something that you know what you have faith in planting. So thankfully, new technology seems to be shortening that time period. And, you know, CRISPRs and some of these other things hold a lot of promise. And I think that's where the future of the industry is.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we can recover the infrastructure, and what do you need to come back? You know, how many juice plants do we really need to support an industry in the future? And you know, we've got a couple of packing houses that are hanging in there, 3 or 4 of these 2 juice plants that are operating. But it's
So to further answer your question, the new grove is going to be on south of 60 or up in North Florida and South Georgia.
well,
It's going to be.
There's a lot of land on Dewey Robbins Road in Lake County.
There are, but Orlando's growing there. It's that the people who want to put up big houses price that land too high. So it's got to be done in on cheaper land, less demand for the land. It's got to be done on large scale so you can have efficiencies. Right. It's got to be done with the mindset of mechanical harvesting, which the industry's talked about for 50 years, but we're closer now with all the new technology to being able to do that. And it won't be our old, you know, Hamlin on Swingle or Valencia on sour root. Right. It will be a different tree. It'll be a new tree.
So to Rex's point, I just purchased some gift fruit yesterday from Pete Spikes, and it's pages being harvested in South Georgia, and some navels coming out of West Florida that we would have 30 years ago we would have never thought about, and but it's going to be cups, it's going to be in greenhouses, it's going to be high density, it's going to be extremely productive varieties that have extreme market acceptance, and it's going to be a very expensive operation. It's going to be like Canadian greenhouse tomatoes. It's going to be very technically oriented, and to Rex's point, it's going to be CRISPR or genetics.
How would you like to, Rex? I went out to Chuck Allison's tangos at Lake Yale.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
So here's this beautiful tree. He's surviving
Beautiful.
in greening.
Yeah.
He's doing a
They
great
got
job.
to spot pick them 4 or 5 times a year because they can't cook them in a greenhouse. So they got to get size and color, and you're paying a tremendous price. You got to get hand labor to do that. And then he had 20 acres of red navels that he clipped because they never would make maturity, never would get standards. Replanted with an ori tangerine from Israel. I don't know how it is, but I'm going to go out there and pretty soon they start to mature, and we'll see what the ori is like. So there are people like Chuck and Bill Lennon and Glenn Beck and others that are persevering, and they're going to be innovative. They're going to try different ways of doing it, but it's not going to be like it was before. We all miss going outside in the spring, and didn't make any difference where we were around here. You were just inundated with orange blossoms, and you knew when the juice plants were starting because they were pelletizing the peel and everything else, and that was an odor that was there. And
One of the worst things about greening is that many of us on the right land with the right water and the right management can grow a tree, still grow trees that look pretty decent, still set some fruit. But when it comes to harvest, there's just no pound solids, nothing that'll pass there. So you're sort of drawn in every spring. You say, oh man, it's a new year and I'm going to try something different, and my trees look pretty good. So you go out there and spend your money, and when this time of year you look around and you're getting nothing to sell. And it's heartbreaking, and it just, but I'm still, I think the second largest grower in Seminole County now. I got 3 acres in my backyard, and they look pretty good, so I'm gonna fertilize them again this year.
but it is amazing, and I didn't grow up in the business, and so I'm a newcomer. But just in my citrus career, to see where we have gone, in 1980, Lake County produced 44 million boxes of citrus. We had 5 juice plants, 26 packing houses, 29,000 people involved in growing, harvesting, and everything else with citrus. And it was producing about 8-9% of the ad valorem tax dollars for the county. And it was paradise. And back then, you were worried about controlling greasy spot and rust mites. Life was tough, wasn't it? I mean, when do we spray for rust mites, and when do we deal with greasy spot? And look what's happened. So we're at the point now, at least from my perspective, where this is, to me, this is the satisfaction that I get from talking to people, learning the history, trying to share the history. What is so darn discouraging is I'll go give talks to groups of historical organizations that have no clue of what the citrus industry used to be like. They changed the name of Claremont. It's no longer the Gem of the Hills. It's some now pre-Olympic training facility. And citrus control was the economy of Claremont. Well,
so
all these were redneck towns. Oviedo was a redneck town.
When David and I were growing up, there were orange groves, small and large. There was hardly a block anywhere around here.
This was an orange grove.
This was an orange grove.
Where this office building is sitting was an orange grove.
There were orange groves everywhere.
Actually, it was a Dancy tangerine grove.
Yeah.
This was actually a Dancy tangerine grove right here. And
I mean, and of course, it was constantly changing. As in the 60s, those started to be developed in town. But you asked a question earlier about when would you make the decision to convert. My grandparents and parents always said that progress in Florida is coming. In fact, my dad said that when he went off to war, he realized that the rest of the world didn't understand what a paradise Florida was. So it's always been a place, and will continue, I think, in the foreseeable future to be. I mean, the whole world wants to move to the United States, and everybody in the United States wants to move to Florida. So growth is inevitable. We were never trying to fight it. We were trying to do what we loved with and adapted to growth around us. But greening changed all that, and it won't be me who's going to plant the next perfect grove that goes back to beautiful production.
Yeah, but you still can't get farming out of your blood. You get rid of the citrus grove, and the next thing I hear, you got Big Daddy's farm, and you're back in the vegetable business. And you didn't do that because you were going to make any money. You did that because you just love growing things and like to see it grow.
Yeah, it was great fun, and it was kind of a long time dream because I moved away from Oviedo right out of college, and started managing our big farm in Zellwood. So I lived in Apopka, and but we had land back here, had good vegetable land back here, not for production agriculture, but for small scale. So kind of always had that dream of coming back and growing vegetables, and I loved the 5 years I spent doing that because I got to grow things like Brussels sprouts and arugula and onions, and grew 70, 80 different things, flowers that I had never grown before, and was very heartwarming to me. On the other hand, that's hard work. That's work for a 30-something, not a 70-something. So after 5 years of throwing a lot of money at having that much fun, we decided to close that up, and now I spend my days, building fences and mowing pastures and trying to make the cattle grazing a little more efficient, and new cow pens, etc.
Farming.
Yeah,
That's right.
So
He's not a cowboy.
I can still get on a tractor or a loader every day.
So it's interesting that Rex and I have both been through the Wedgeworth classes, and I was in class 3. And I still remember one thing that one of the economics professors at the University of Florida said, and that is that the efficiency of the American farm producer allows America to enjoy a standard of living that the rest of the world doesn't, because we spend 8 to 9, 10% of our disposable income on food, whereas the rest of the country, especially Europe, is spending 18 to 22%. And so that's why if you let that connect all the dots, that's why we have bigger cars, bigger refrigerators, bigger houses, higher standard of living, is because of the efficiency that the American farmer. And so we saw it in citrus when we started really advertising. We saw really advertising. Advertising pulled citrus products through the market. Before, we were trying to push it through. So advertising pulls and production pushes. When we get back to the point that people are willing to pay what the real price should be for an orange, then you will have incentives for people to get back into these high cost production models. But until that, it's not going to be there. Equity always follows return across globes or across markets. Equity follows return. And so you've got to have good margins and high returns for money to come back into an industry. And so this is what we're going to need if in citrus or agriculture period, is we're going to have to get the price point of a commodity high enough that a producer thinks he can make something with a certain amount of risk, and he will be rewarded for his efforts.
Yeah, there'll be some visionaries out there that will come up with unique deals. I mean, look at, he went to direct marketing. We go back to a marketing principle, become vertically integrated, right? If you go from the seed to the consumer, you're supposed to cut out the middleman and retain more of the profits back to you. But yeah, it's going to be different. And you know, David, the reason that American farmers were so efficient was because they had county agents that helped them as they went through it.
County agents with the name John?
That helped them become efficient. And it has been an interesting story. And you know, it used to be that half the people fed the other half, and now 2% feed
So
everybody.
the technology is going to get here. The technology for robotic harvesting, the technology for robotic production practices is going to be here. I just was exposed to a situation where this company is now building big enough drones that they can pick up and lift and spray 100 pounds of product. And I'm thinking to myself, that is huge. That's going to be what comes, that in genetics and then American entrepreneurship and creativity. That will put American domestic production back.
Yeah, we'll always be farming. It'll be a little bit different direction. Heck, I drive out on Lake Yale and Chuck's got a mechanical blueberry harvester, and we're going to harvest citrus like that. We're going to grow them, and we're going to straddle them, and we're going to shake them and pick them up.
Well, John, think too about the national security of the United States. If you can't feed yourself, then you don't have national security, and you have to have people with the technology. I mean, you can't walk onto a farm and start farming successfully. There's historical knowledge that has to be there, and that is something that we've got to continue introducing into the industry, is young people coming through who have sat at the dinner table and had their parents talk about production practices, economics, banking, environment, marketing, and if you don't have that coming through the pipeline, then you at some point you hit a roadblock. So.
But I want to wrap up.
Okay.
I want to wrap up with the fact that you guys are helping me with a little project to tell the story of citrus in Central Florida, and I think this is what our last contribution is going to be, kind of the citrus deal.
So
the whole story. There's so many stories that are out there.
Right. I want to put that label up because that label shows up everywhere, and that's the Nelson Company Moonbeam label, and that is on Brenda and Jerry Chicone's book, and it's been used, and that is our label, and we used it both in citrus and in celery, and so how do we wrap up, John?
Well, I think that we wrap up with the fact that the story of the citrus industry is fascinating, and it's one that we have to be committed to sharing, because not that many people here know it. And so however we can go about spreading the message, and today's technology, we got to use things that kids get a hold of, the magic phone, the computer. And also, I think that it's important that we have places that we can display artifacts. You know, museums are extremely limited. You know, a museum in Orlando will take paper, but you try to take them a speed sprayer, they're going to have a heck of a time trying to find a place to put a speed sprayer in a museum. And so somehow we've got to be able to tell the story, not just through electronic media, but physically. And you know, y'all know we're trying to build a barn up at Barberville, which is a pioneer settlement, but there needs to be other locations that we can display citrus memorabilia. Barberville only goes through the 1930s, and so tractors and sprayers and stuff like that need to be in some of the locations.
I want to make one observation, and that is a person that we call a farmer or an agriculturalist is so much wider and deeper than the normal concept or belief. A farmer has to be a banker, an economist, a marketer, has to be an agriculturalist, has to be a chemist, They have to master all of these sciences and all of these what I call critical skills, and so they're not a silo. They're not a silo in any means. It just takes all of that to be successful, and Rex has been as good a farmer as I know of in two different areas, citrus and celery and other row crops. But it takes all those skills and all that wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom that has to come to play, and a lot of memory, institutional memory has to play out for people to be successful.
You got to go with the flow. You got to be adapted to it.
Yeah.
David?
John Jackson?
You know, the best thing about my job is I make fantastic friends and get to know them and everything. Rex and I talk about grandkids and how Grace is doing and everything else. And
How big the fish we caught were.
David and I share one deal that both of our sons are attorneys. And so it's one big family. And
it is.
I'm committed to sharing this story because it's fantastic. I'm a storyteller at Barberville, and so every month they have an event. I get to share a story, and so we'll spread the word.
So
we'll get it out.
And my daughter, Kaylin Evans Chat, she loves labels, and so she's here we're hoping she comes today to talk to Brenda about labels, because Brenda was very instrumental with Jerry Chacon and putting together the label book. And
that's just one spin-off. Those were marketing tools, and
Right.
now they're collector items and they're art.
Right.
And so many stories like
Yeah.
that. All right. Goodbye, folks.